All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to West Coast Vascular and Interventional Society Personal Statement Workshop. We're so glad to have everyone. My name is Danusha Wanirachige. I'll be moderating today's event, and I wanted to shout out Anusha Desai and Andrew Mardini, two individuals who made this event possible. Great. So, before I introduce the panelists today and get into the the content, just I want to talk a little bit about WCVIS for those that don't know. Our mission is to develop a trainee section to educate, recruit, and connect those passionate with pursuing a 100% endovascular and interventional surgical career with comprehensive and longitudinal clinical care. The direction of VIR as a specialty will be defined by those who will not compromise in providing the best possible care to their patients. We have structured a trainee section to support individuals at every stage, including pre-medical, medical student, resident, and early career. This slide shows some of the variety of ongoing projects we currently have. Some of those include a spreadsheet for all VIR programs with a lot of information, including VIR months, PGY 2 through 4, the amount of clinic, vascular experience, neurointerventional training, etc. Many of our projects are packaged into multiple series, such as How to Crush Your Sub-I series, the Acute Care series, WCVIS Match series, Unite and WCVIS series, and the Landmark Trial series. We also offer educational and mentorship opportunities, and we have a upcoming podcast on 100% VIR practices. And we're always trying to think of more projects to get people involved. We encourage you to stay updated, so please follow us on social media at WCVI Society on X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And please check out our website at wcvis.org to stay up to date with events and opportunities. If you're interested in becoming a member, you can apply by following this website at www.wcvis.org/membership, or you can follow the QR code that's listed here. I also wanted to plug in another event that we have going on later this month. It's a volunteer open house, so it's a great opportunity for people who maybe are now discovering VIR or discovering us and want to find other ways to get involved. It'll take place on Sunday, August 23rd, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And again, you can learn about upcoming volunteer opportunities and ways to get involved. So with that, I want to introduce our two panelists for tonight's event. Tonight for me, but so first we have Abinaya Ramakrishnan. She is a current PGY-1, doing her surgical intern year at Swedish Medical Center. She did her medical school at UCLA, David Geffen School of Medicine, and she will complete her VIR residency at the University of Washington. Next, we have Lauren Hui, another PGY-1 who's currently doing her surgical year at Yale. She completed her medical school at TCU School of Medicine, and she will continue with her VIR residency at Yale as well. So with that, want to thank you all. Thank you, panelists, for coming to talk to us today. Lauren has prepared a PowerPoint that we'll go into, and she'll discuss some of the tricks and things that she did personally when she was applying for beefing up the personal statement. So, Lauren, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome, thanks. And then Abhi and I will both collaborate on this. I just started sharing my screen. Let me know when you can see it. I know it's probably black right now.
We're good. I can see it now.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. It's nice to be back. Me and Abinaya were heavily involved in West Coast Vascular and Interventional Society during our medical school years, and so it's always happy to see everyone and give back a little bit. So no disclosures, and these opinions do not reflect those of our institutions. So let's go ahead. So why even, come to this event? Like, why listen to us? So fun fact is like both Abhi and I have been really heavily involved outside of medical school in like admissions counseling, including editing personal statements for, people all throughout different stages of their medical school careers. So I guess the next logical step is going to be helping you with your residency personal statements. And so I've been doing this since 2018, and so has Abby.
Yeah, I
Anything
also
else to
started
add?
right in my after I got accepted to college. I started the summer before college, working with a company called College Vine. Um, it has since gone through numerous different transitions, but back then it was like the one of the major college consulting organizations, and then have since found my own client base and still continue to this day to do a lot of college admissions counseling. And then worked with UCLA for part of my time, also doing some med school admissions as well.
Okay. I would love for this to be like interactive. So let's just start with, what is a personal statement? What are some things that you guys have heard about it? Feel free to unmute and share, and then we'll chat about it.
You can also drop your thoughts in the chat as well.
So my understanding from a personal statement is that it's a way for you outside of the other parts of your application to showcase who you are as like a person, outside of like, numbers and other things like that.
I really like that. Ryan just raising his hand.
Yeah, I've kind of like always thought of it as just like a way for them to get to know you a little bit and maybe give a story or just better explanation as to like why you want to pursue what you're pursuing, like in this case, like VIR. And then maybe like what are some qualities that would make you like a good candidate for residency?
Yeah, I think both of you have really hit the nail on the head, so to speak. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what is special about the residency personal statement. So again, I agree with everyone. Like it's an introduction to you and who you are in your own words, right? Who you are as a unique candidate. It needs to have your why. So why VIR? Including, what draws you to the field, keeps you interested. I think Ryan mentioned, like, what are you going to offer the program or unique qualities that you bring? I think a really great part to add in is going to be what you hope to accomplish, like maybe future career goals and how pursuing this path is, or like particularly training at a certain program is going to prepare you for that. And then, personalized to the program if able. And if you can't tell, I organized it 1 through 6 because that's actually how I recommend if you have no idea how to start this, you can literally write paragraphs 1 through 6 exactly like that. Again, but there's a lot of free range, I guess, interpretation of this as well. What are your thoughts, Abby?
I would agree. I would say that I did pretty much this, and then we'll get into this more specifically, but I personalized for my top 20 programs. So essentially, I applied to 35 programs or so for VIR, and I personalized all my top 20. So that included my gold, my silver, and then everything else that I did in Signal as well. And we'll get more into that as we continue through the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay. And I also like to point out some like common misconceptions. Okay, so just starting with number one, I think I read this in almost all personal statements, like why like people love the field so much or like why it's so great. I think that takes away word count from you focusing on why you love it, or like what experiences you've had. I think a lot of people also make, I guess not truly a mistake, but reiterating anything that's already in your CV, your activities list, or awards. There's a reason why it's on there. So this should be a little bit separate from that. It's okay if you draw from those experiences to talk about specific moments, but I don't need you to relist it, right? No one wants to read a CV again. I'm a little bit particular in that I don't really like asking people to put down like sob stories. It should really be about what you learned and how it motivates you towards the field, not necessarily about like what the actual event was or like what you went through. It's about your growth and um, what you learned. And then I think the other misconception is like having it be just like, oh, I've treated so many different patients and these are all my different cool stories. I think you get lost in the sauce if that happens. It needs to be about you ultimately. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that someone once told me this and I still believe it. Like the biggest thing is to make sure you don't have any red flags with your personal statement. Like read it, proofread it, have someone else read it. Don't say anything that can come off as racist, homophobic, any of that, because you're immediately gonna get like red flagged, even if the rest of your application is great. You can be in the solid 80% in the middle. And I probably was solidly in that middle 80%. Um, most of us are probably not going to be in that top 10%. As someone who is now like helping with our like Swedish admission cycle and everything, like I can tell you that most of us are reading this or probably reading this at 10 p.m. after we've like had a whole day of cases. Like my mentor said the same thing. Like at UCLA, they'd be like, yeah, I've had a whole day of cases. I have clinic, I have cases tomorrow, etc. And I'm reading this at 10 p.m. You want this to be the easiest thing for them to read, that it's not complicated. They're not having to go back and forth and trying to figure out what you're trying to say. You wanted to lay it to them as straightforward and simplistically as possible because they truly don't have the energy to try and navigate your like unique way of storytelling in that moment.
That's a really great point. All right, let's start with paragraph one, introduction to you. So when I was learning how to kind of start crafting this by myself or through speaking with mentors, a lot of people tell you, it should be a brief introduction to yourself. I was encouraged to tell like my story in a brief way, like to include what's your why medicine and then go into the specialty. So it's okay to dig up your old personal statement and just kind of remember like what was your why back then and how does it connect to your future goal of entering the field of VIR. And then I like to encourage people to find a common theme because I think that a lot of your activities in medical school may have connected in some way to what your values are, right? Like, what are your values as a person, and how can you bring that to connect to your future goal? Like, for instance, for me, mine was really, I liked working with underserved and like non-English speaking populations. And that's something that I brought from very early on in college, like in high school, working, sorry, like all the way from like my childhood all the way through to med school and then like beyond. So it made a more cohesive story. Like you're telling the reader from like A to B instead of like, dropping them in the middle of your life and saying, wow, that's why I want to do VIR. Anything that you want to add, Abby?
No, I personally didn't do any of this. I just had like a really interesting singular sentence and then was like, I love IR. And then I continued with the rest of my um with my personal statement. So I only had two sentences. But yeah, if you have the space and energy to do this, you should do this.
Okay. Yeah, and we actually have a lot of different examples from like multiple of our friends and applicants, so we can actually explore that. I just added this really quickly here, like hooks. We use like a singular, very interesting statement, and you'll see it. Maybe you'll be able to pick it out. But some people like to start with a question or like a statistic. The only thing is like for me personally, I hate tell like when people start with quotes because it's like why would you waste your word count to use someone else's words when you could use your own? That's like my personal pet peeve, but
Yeah, agreed. I also don't know what you're going to necessarily quote for your, yeah, our personal statement or just your personal statement in general. I think it should be personal. So, um, even if you choose a quote, choose one that's extremely short.
yeah. All right. um I don't think I'm gonna read this out completely to you guys, but this was pretty interesting. So playing guitar, this person started with playing guitar and then connected it to um, being a methodical person, and then ended it with like, and that's how I discovered like VIR. So this one was kind of unusual, and it was a little bit longer of a introduction. Um, so, anyone have thoughts about this? Or Abhi, do you have thoughts about it?
I think it's unique, it's different. It tells me something else that I probably would not have picked up immediately about this person's application. And it has the nice little transition at the end towards hopefully the rest of their personal statement. And if you can see the sentences, oh, go back, are pretty straightforward. Like I don't have to, there's one longer sentence, like from John Mayer's, etc. But a lot of the sentences are pretty short. There's not a lot of commas, like they're not like really long sentences that my eyes are just like scrolling over it. So again, I would think of that person at midnight who's had a full day of cases and whether you're making this as easy as it possible for them to read it.
This one is from mine, actually. So it's actually missing a intro part that I just talked about how I would talk to my mom about like what language do you dream in, and then it goes to this recent phenomenon began in blah blah blah, and then I talked about my background from becoming a medical assistant and growing up in an immigrant family to like what I value as a future physician. So this was from mine. Okay.
And this is from mine. Like I said, it was very short. Basically, I wanted to be a roller coaster designer when I was very young. I loved amusement parks. And for me, it was also the ability to combine like problem solving of like how could we make this really cool roller coaster with like my own creativity. And then from right there, I went into how VIR is actually very similar to being a roller coaster designer, because you're constantly designing and creating new solutions for patients.
Awesome. So three very different ways to start your essay. But I think at the end of your first paragraph, you need to be starting to talk about like VIR or like mention it because they're not going to want to read the entire statement halfway through before you start talking about the field. I think it's not a good use of space to have it otherwise. So going from that into your why VIR, I think most people start with like a patient anecdote. But if you had very little exposure to this, which I have run across many times, I will talk about, I'll encourage you to talk about how you first came across VIR or like what did you do further to get interested or like learn more about the field and like what draws you to the field. I mean,
Yeah,
what
I would
advice do you
agree. I
have for
would say
that?
that I initially had, I probably had 10 drafts of my personal statement before I chose one that I actually ended up going with. And a lot of those early drafts didn't have a patient anecdote, but I really felt that it felt like something was missing without one. At the end of the day, you are a physician, a clinician, you are treating patients. So not having something that connects to that patient-facing aspect just felt like there was something missing. So I agree. I do think that having a patient anecdote is probably what like 80 to 90% of people do. If you're able to get away with not having one, I don't think anyone really brought up that patient anecdote, but I will say people did ask me further questions about the anecdote I did use. So be sure to like go back and read up on that patient, see how that patient is doing, etc., and have a good grasp of knowledge about that patient because someone might be curious enough to know more about that patient during interviews.
All right. So just a couple of examples. I think most of you know how to write a patient anecdote, but as much as possible, I would be mindful of HIPAA. So this one is just like a first name and like a middle-aged man and like a brief description. And this person used it as the start to their essay. So at the end, it's the beginning of my path to the IR, right? This is brief. I don't think that there's anything that any more information I would need from this situation to understand what was happening. Okay.
Oh, this is mine. Yeah. Sorry, it's a little crooked. So I briefly talk about my interest in VIR began early in med school and further solidified during a case. So I used a fake patient name, and I put it in quotes in order to underline that this is not the real patient's name. Had multiple occlusions in various veins, and then they had multiple stents. And then when conventional techniques failed, we ended up creating a fistula between the SMA and the SMV to establish inflow and reduce the risk of further thrombosis. I ended up doing what Lauren's going to say next within that same paragraph, but I'll go ahead and read it. Over the next month, I stayed closely involved in Steve's care. I saw the emotional toll of every additional procedure as he waved goodbye to his children, wondering if it would be the last time he saw them. To me, this is like that personal, like patient-facing aspect that as a physician, I'm not just going to be a technician. I'm going to be someone who truly does care about the patient and their family and want to promote my patient's health, even if that's more than just like what I can offer from a VIR perspective. But it also was, for me, this was the other big part, is witnessing the collaboration with transplant, liver ICU, GI teams, as together we explored every possible option. For me, that's another big point that I really wanted to highlight in my personal statement is I'm someone who's going to collaborate with all these different specialists as I go forward in my VIR journey because I am going to have to work with ICU doctors and GI doctors and PCPs and surgeons and everyone in order to go forward in my career. And then I ended up kind of going back to my initial first paragraph where I say, although it may not be the same as designing a roller coaster, cases like this have affirmed why I want to pursue interventional radiology, a field that combines relentless problem solving and multidisciplinary collaboration to make a tangible impact on patients' lives.
Great. This one I think brings up a point like, something felt incomplete, even though they enjoyed surgery. And they talked about just being in a paracentesis and how much the patient improved. I think the part to highlight about patient anecdotes is not so much necessarily the like patient or like you shouldn't be walking them through the procedure, but you need to be focusing on what did you gain from this experience? How did it change how you think about your specialty? And so I want to highlight, I understood how image-guided interventions could offer near immediate relief to patients whose conditions might otherwise feel overwhelming. It was the first instance I saw how the mindset I once used to tackle difficult music step by step could also guide real solutions for patients in need, right? I really like that it wraps that up and what they gain from it easily.
Yeah. I also think that, sorry, Lauren, the other thing is when you start thinking about what patient anecdote to use, I would start brainstorming like what do you want the reader to learn about you from whatever story you're about to say. For me, that was like I care about my patients, one, and then two, that I really like the collaborative aspect of VIR. Like that's what I went into that story thinking about, and then also the creativity. So I framed my story based on the fact that someone could read that paragraph and walk away with those three themes that I wanted them to understand about me. And I think same for this, and I think same for the next story that Lauren's going to say. So I wouldn't just choose like the coolest case or the most interesting case, etc. I would really think about like what do you want the reader to get from that paragraph and what story will help you most seamlessly get to that end point.
That was beautifully put. I totally agree. This one was from my statement. So I just talked about I wanted to utilize new technologies to better the lives of my patients, but also, I talked about wanting to be community-based. And so I'm personally very interested in like MSK pain interventions and interventional oncology. So the anecdote that I chose was not from a cool case. This was just a G-tube placement. But during my interviews when the program directors would ask me about this, I got multiple compliments that, what are the procedures that actually impact patients' lives the most? Like, the comfort and immediate relief that you get from a paracentesis, a thoracentesis, like bread and butter stuff, not even like necessarily cool stuff. They want to know that you still enjoy those procedures or know that it is very impactful, even if it's something you do every day. And that is the compliment that I got from writing this paragraph. So, okay. I'm just going to move forward because we have a lot of examples. Okay, so why VIR and your motivations? I think this often ties very well into your examples and like your patient interactions. But like what Abby said, this is a great chance to highlight what are your interests within the field. Like if you're interested in pediatrics or neurointervention, I think it's worth adding to your personal statement, because how else are they going to know, like, what is this person like wanting to do more in, right? Like looking towards the future, not just doing what we already do. And then this is also a way to highlight your themes and your motivations and what's going to keep you motivated. Um, anything?
No, yeah, I think for me that was a lot of like women's health work, and for Lauren, like she said, it's a lot of pain. So I think we both found like our own niche within VIR and highlighted it. But that's not to say if you're someone who hasn't really found that niche, you can also just continue talking about the broad perspective that VIR has and everything, and maybe highlight like, oh, I have done some procedures in this and I'm interested in it, or like, oh, I went to SIR and I like learned about this cool procedure and I'm like interested in learning more about it. So I think that's what's really unique about VIR is it's so broad that it has a space for everyone. And I would at least allude to something you're interested in, because if you think about the larger programs out there, UW being one of them, like we have four people, all four of us cannot be interested in the same thing. Like they want us each to have our own like paths that we're thinking about. And I think same for Lauren. Like if you think about Yale, they have a global health person, they have a research person, like they have someone that is in their own niche. And it's really hard if all four people have the exact same niche. Um, so I would just try to highlight at least one thing about VIR that you're more interested in, or have maybe done a little bit more research or have had more clinical experience with, because that in some way will help distance you from the other people as they're thinking about the class that they want to build.
Yep, exactly. Okay. And then just two brief examples. Um, like the one on the top, I would say is more along the lines of someone who hasn't necessarily chosen like a specific part of VIR that they're interested in, but they like every aspect of it, right? Like from the imaging and the consults, multidisciplinary tumor boards, and like highlighting collaboration. And I guess that's what they value. Um, the one on the bottom, like that's from my statement. And I just wanted to highlight that even though there are like different aspects of the field that interest me, like I was really interested in like IO and pain management. And so that's what I chose to highlight. Okay.
And then this is mine. For me, I did a lot of research across like the spectrum of VIR because I got started very early. So I really wanted to highlight my work in innovation. Um, and I've done a lot of like randomized control trial work. I've done prospective trials. I got a grant, all that stuff. So I felt like that kind of clumped into like I want to build new devices that's like helping the next generation of VIR people. So I highlighted like my work with a prospective trial. I highlighted my new project I was working on under a grant I got from SIR that was to create lumbar artery embolization and create a feasible way to deliver that for facet arthropathy. So I think that was where my like niche or so was I want to be on the edge of not just providing care, but also being on the back end and really trying to develop novel embolic agents and novel tools in order to continue to move the field forward. And I really like my last sentence, sorry. I'm drawn to the idea that I will never stop growing in this field. There will always be new skills to master, new knowledge to learn, and new questions to investigate. And I think that really sums up me. Like, if you ever get the time to get to know me, I think Lauren and some of the other WCVIS people can speak to it, is like, I'm someone who is so curious and who will like keep pushing and asking questions. And I just love to learn just for the sake of learning. And I really wanted a sentence to highlight that.
I really like that sentence too. I think sentence structure wise, a lot of people list out a bunch of things and it's like five or six things, but this is just like a grammar tip. Like your list should be like three things. Like no one can really like grasp the sentence if it's beyond three things in in a sentence. So. All right. So just going forward, what do you offer to the program? Like, I think when program directors read these statements, they're also thinking about what Avi said. So what kind of class is this going to be? Like, what kind of people am I training and mentoring? Like, what can I offer them? What are they looking for? So um, I would say just on your own, brainstorm five qualities like you think that a program director might want in a resident. And like maybe is there an example that you can provide about how you have that quality and that's what you're going to bring to their program? And because I think it's very vague, like none of us are program directors, I came up with this non-exhaustive list of like what you might be able to offer. So like curiosity is one of them. Like for Abby, she's really interested in research. Some people really love global health. I love teaching and like doing mentorship and things like that. Other people are going to be into like leadership, advocacy, like cross collaboration. And maybe sometimes you're able to work in your unique background. So like, do you come from an international background? If is that going to help you in your future endeavors? Like, do you plan to go and do like very rural VIR? Program directors want to know that, and they want to kind of see, oh, what kind of diversity are you going to bring to this class? Okay, and then just a couple of mini examples here. This person on the top talks about how they were involved in teaching and how they were able to share their passion. And it's what she learned was it was incredibly enriching to teach other students all about all that IR makes possible, paying forward what I once gained as a learner. One on the bottom, that's from my statement. I really like advocacy, so I talked about like wanting to be an advocate for my patients in my future program. All right,
I didn't
and
add
then
one because I felt like my last example kind of had that clumped together. So to Lauren's point, you can have like each paragraph have like that part, but I think you can also clump it into the other things if they feel like they flow better together.
totally agree. And then also like just being mindful of like how big your paragraphs get. Like it's easier to read like mini paragraphs. Like if you just imagine like three giant paragraphs and that's your whole personal statement, no one's going to want to read that. So at appropriate times, it's good to break up some of those statements. But Abby did a great job with hers. Okay. And then I just probably want to keep moving this forward, but just, on your own time, brainstorm three headlines about you as a resident or like as an attending, like what do you want to accomplish? And that's also what program directors may want to know. It's like, are you going to be the next person that pioneers like, I don't know, a new tips or something crazy? This is a very pioneering field. So okay, no need to commit to your goals. But I think a lot of questions that are going to be about the personal statement or in the interview will ask you, what do you envision your future career to be? Because they want to know how are they going to contribute to who you're going to be in the future, right? So if you have any specific environments that you want to practice in or like you want to be in leadership in the future, future SIR president, whatever, it is cool to mention those things so that they know, oh, okay, like this is the kind of trainee that I'm cultivating. So, all right. So people have very different goals, as you can see from these three examples. Like this is what also helps to set you apart, right? The first one is really um, just being a great overall physician. Second one came from mine. I talked about wanting to do rural and underserved health. The third person mentions a little bit about how they're interested in continuing in research, mentorship, and the combination of all. So probably maybe an academic person.
And then this is mine. Kind of going back to the last two parts, I put them all into like a conclusion paragraph. So my experiences in IR have taught me that the specialty demands more than technical skill, which I think is important to acknowledge. Because oftentimes I think VIR can be thought of as technicians instead of clinicians and physicians. And I've even gotten that said to me as a VIR bound person during my surgery year, where they're like, yeah, we're better than IR, we're clinicians. And I think that oftentimes people think IR is very technical rather than being a physician who actually thinks about what we're doing. It requires being a clinician who is deeply committed to being a lifelong learner, guides patients before, during, and after procedures, and works collaboratively to provide comprehensive care, whether it is repurposing a device, navigating complex occlusions, or providing support for patients during some of their most vulnerable times. I hope to bring the same sense of curiosity and empathy to every encounter. I know I still have much to learn, which to me is like showing my humble nature. But I am eager to grow into the kind of interventional radiologist who approaches every case with patient-centered care like it is my sibling, parent, or grandparent on the table. That's something that Dr. V, if you've ever met him, will always say, like, think of this as like your parent, your sibling, your grandparent who's there. And I've used that a lot even now as a physician, like during residency. I'm like, if this is my like parent, like this is what I would say to them. Um, and I think that that phrase for me like has always hit really hard, and I wanted that to be somewhere in my personal statement. And then at the end, I said, I can't wait to dedicate myself fully to this field, which is just my way of concluding the essay.
Awesome. And then, Avi, I know you personalized your statements. I also did for mine, but I applied to a lot more programs. I applied to, I don't know, like probably 80 programs when I was doing my VIR, and then I applied to even more DR programs. But I like to add, if you are passionate about a specific program, try to personalize it so that they know why you're applying to their program. For me, because I was applying to a lot, I only personalized for programs I signaled to or had a geographic tie to. So in total, that was maybe about 20, 30 statements, but it was just like the bottom last paragraph, like pretty easy to add. I would also add, don't lie about it. Don't lie about a fake aunt that lives in that city because they're going to ask, oh, where do they live? Right. And then you're going to be like, oh, I've never been there. Or I don't know. So, all right, just some examples. The first one was from mine. I talked about OHSU being the birthplace of VIR and talked about some of their specialties. And I talked about, I have extended family nearby and I can thrive in Portland. So all of my personalizations were vaguely circled, like somewhat like these, especially if I had like family members or if I had a specific like research mentor that trained at their program, I might name drop them there. And then the one is on the bottom is just kind of, you can even see like star, 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 like this person copied and pasted. So I don't necessarily recommend copying and pasting, especially if you're trying to personalize. But try to add just a little bit of whatever extra flavor you need.
Yeah. Um, so I have two examples here. So one is from like an away rotation I did because I did the away rotation before my ERAS was due, so I was able to like personalize more in depth. Um, I use the top two sentences are the same from my like original conclusion that I shared. And then from there, I said during my away sub-I at UCSF at SF General, I witnessed faculty who not only model blah, blah, blah. I was particularly inspired by this person and then their research. Just as impactful was the chance to care for the underserved population at SF General, which is like one of their big level one trauma hospitals, where I learned how IR can bridge gaps in access to care and directly address health disparities. Although I'm not originally from the Bay Area, I am drawn to its unique position as a hub for medical innovation, entrepreneurship, and cutting edge research. And then I tell why like UCSF would help me, like why it's the ideal environment. Um, so I would recommend doing that for all your aways at least. Make sure that you like personalize the end because it's not just a generic program you're applying to. You usually spend a significant amount of time there. The other thing that I did often do is like my husband works in biotech. So any places that were huge hubs for biotech, I made sure to like say my husband works in biotech and this would be an opportunity for not just me to grow professionally, but for also his career. So Bay Area, so Stanford got that type of ending. UW, because Seattle is like a huge tech hub, Boston, New York City. And then I'm originally from Chicago. So my ending for all the Chicago or like Midwest programs were like I'd be really close to my parents and my family. I have like a great support system there. My sister's about to start medical school. So we're like my family's guaranteed to be there for the next at least 4 years there. So I included all of that and then also made sure to say that again during my interview. Because I do think that at the end of the day, programs want you to come as much as they care about their yield. Like they do not want to drop to 20 plus on their rank list. Like they want to rank people that actually want to come to their program. So having something at the end in order to show that you've one researched the program. Lauren, can you go to the next one? Yeah, so these are not programs that I actually did a ways at, but as you can see, UW, where I ended up matching, I like specifically went and looked at what hospitals they rotate through. So for example, they do pediatric IR at Seattle Children's, which is like the only children's hospital in the Pacific Northwest. Fred Hutch is like the only cancer center for like 5 different states. Like Harborview is another like community hospital, is the only level 1 hospital for like 5 different states. So like the opportunity to get to see so much pathology and like serve a very, very, very diverse patient population was important. And then you can also see the sentence about my husband. Given my husband's career in the biotech sector and the numerous family and friends in the area, Seattle would be both a professionally and personally supportive place to train. I probably could have reworded that a little bit, but you get the point of like trying to do some research, try to understand what hospitals they're rotating through, and then trying to connect that to why your VIR. So if your VIR was like, I want to get really comprehensive training, and then you list all these different places that make sense, or like I'm in Lauren's case, she's really interested in pain. So talking about what are the different pain interventions that they're doing at that hospital, who's working on them, what research they're doing. I think those like extra 4 or 5 minutes that you spend per program and having somewhat of a template will help you kind of get your foot in the door for the interview. And then oftentimes they'll be like, oh, like we saw that you were really interested in like blah, 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 blah in your personal statement. Like, tell me more about what you've heard about it. And then U Chicago, like I said, I'm from the Chicago area. So for me, I specifically said, additionally, as a Chicago native, I cannot think of a better institution to continue my training where I will have the support of my family and friends while working with and treating the community I grew up in. Um, and I think that to me was also an important part of like the Midwest. So I said something similar to like Michigan, WashU, Indiana. Like they all knew, I made sure they knew I was from Chicago and that their hospital was like a 4 hour drive from home or a 3.5 hour drive from home. Like I made that really clear. And I actually looked up the distance on like Google Maps because I wanted them to know like this for me is like a weekend trip home and something I would really value.
All right. So I think that's like everything for the personal statement. I just like to add some quick and dirty like do's and don'ts because I think these are the things that we get asked about the most. So AI, like you can't use, please don't use it for generating content. Program directors like moan about this every single year because I still don't think it's really great. Like you can still tell if you're a human usually, but it is really helpful for editing grammar or you can get like some easy feedback from it like hey like how can I make this statement sound stronger or like does this sound I don't know like does this sound funny. Okay, next thing is just like don't lie, right? Like don't talk about the aunt that doesn't exist in that city. Be prepared to answer questions because they will ask you about anything and everything that you write in your personal statement. Don't plagiarize. I don't think many people plagiarize from their personal statements, but like I don't know if it doesn't sound like you, then I think people can usually tell. And then just the quotes from other people. Again, I'm just, why dilute your statement by talking about other people or using their words? That's all I have to say. All right, creative writing tips. There's a lot of ways that you can do this, but try to show, not tell. Anyways, these are very basic things. You can also look these things up. Okay, and then quickly, just reusing content for other specialties. Abi, you went above and beyond. You wrote a separate statement for everything. I did not, and I think with many fellow other people, like they are probably not looking to write 4 separate statements. So, I I will say like it's okay to say you're interested in VIR if you're like dual applying to DR. Um, and these are my tips, just like, what other things interest you about imaging, right? Like MSK Neurobody, they all do procedures to some degree. So,
Yeah. I would
and
also
then,
just say that I didn't believe this going into last cycle, but now having like seen my raw numbers and interview data, most people that have done VIR ways and have predominantly VIR focused like extracurriculars, the chances of you getting a DR only interviews extremely, extremely, extremely slim. And it's probably only going to be for a program that doesn't have an integrated VIR like track. Um, so I wish in retrospect that I didn't spend so much time on my DR personal statement because at the end of the day, like they probably got access to my IR integrated one and they've seen all my extracurriculars and the rest of my application. So it's very hard for them to believe that I'm truly interested in DR for DR's sake. But I will say that you should still put in some energy and effort into it because the DR like program director and APD will have a say in where you are ranked at some point and at most institutions. And they need to know that at least you'll bear through like your 3 years of DR training, even if it's not something that you're going to absolutely love. And the fact is, like, we all are obviously here because we care about VIR a lot, but a strong percentage of us actually end up switching to DR. So they want to know that if you end up hating VIR for whatever reason or life happens, etc., that you will fall back on DR and still have like a good career and be happy with it. Um, so I think those are two important screens that they're having on your personal statement and on interview day as well.
So just some brief DR-ish paragraphs. Just both of these ones talk about synthesizing data and like, interpreting findings. For the bottom one is from mine. It's just, I said I can open my own imaging center. It was like a softball.
This was mine. I actually put my entire DR across like 2 slides. I talk about my sister who actually went to the ED multiple times during my first year of med school because she had like terrible, terrible abdominal pain. And she had polycystic ovarian disease. So as a result, a lot of the imaging was important to know whether she was in torsion or not. And then from there, like how I saw radiology across all my rotations. And then for me, also understanding like you can have longitudinal care, you can do ablations, and then also um, like the role that radiology plays in medicine in general. And then the next slide is a continuation of the statement. And then I talk about an interventional radiologist I shadowed to go back to that. And then also, I mean, radiologists say this all the time, how they're the doctor's doctor, where you could be the consultant and the proceduralist and the expert diagnostician for a lot of these patients. I think the fact that you can do a full circle with VIR is really cool, where you could read the imaging, be like, oh, this patient has like um a PE, and then you could also go and do the PE thrombectomy, and then you could then look and be like, okay, there's actually no PE anymore and the patient's doing well, and then follow up with them in clinic. So I think that like longitudinal spectrum of care that you get with DR is very cool. And then the end was my conclusion of like some of the initiatives that I've done that are more like DR focused, to show that I actually like imaging, and I've like done some work with ultrasound and also the role that radiology played in a lung transplant patient.
All right. So just quick and dirty, some other examples. This one, I mean, for me, I reused most of my VIR personal statement, and then like at the towards the end, I would do a TY specific, like why I think a TY is a good fit for me. I did the same thing. Oh, so that's yours.
Sorry, this is me. So again, I used a lot of my same story about my sister and all that stuff. And then I have a little part that's like a transitional year will provide me with exposure to all facets of medicine that I can draw on as a radiologist. I use my radiology statement for transitional year and I use my VIR statement for surgery. Mostly because TY years have a lot more experience with like DR interns rather than with VIR interns. So I felt like to try and explain VIR and all this was just a lot to do in one page, that I just stuck with radiology, which is something most people are comfortable with. And then I highly recommend this for every TY. I like the last paragraph was unique to that TY. TYs are extremely competitive, probably more than VIR integrateds and more than definitely more than surgery is. So I would spend that extra paragraph specifying like any connections you have to the program, why that program, whether you rotated through that hospital as like a medical student, etc. Because like Ascension Resurrection, for example, extremely competitive. Um, and I think it did help me have a better yield on my TY interviews. I don't know how many TY interviews you got, Lauren, but I probably had like 8 or 9. Um, and I applied to whatever the number was before I had to pay more. Um, and I think that you definitely like this advice I got and I give to everyone because it worked for me and a lot of my friends that did it is to specify in that paragraph like why TY and why that program specifically.
Yeah, I think my yield was a little bit lower, and I don't think necessarily it was because of like the statement that I submitted. I think it had more to do with the fact that it's very competitive to get into a TY. You're in the same pool as people applying to dermatology, and it just tends to favor people with high numbers and who
Yeah.
are going into
And the
those.
other advice I would have for TY programs is if there's a TY program that you really want to interview at and you haven't gotten an interview, around like November, I started emailing those TY programs and being like, hey, like I interviewed at XYZ programs for like radiology in that city. I would love to come to your program as an intern before I go to XYZ program. So showing them that other programs in that city have interviewed you or are interested in you makes it so that they know that your chance of matching that combination is like higher than you just randomly ending up in like North Carolina for a year.
Yep, totally agree with that. And it did help me to get an interview. So, all right. And then surgery, I just talked about how it's going to provide me a robust foundation in like, managing critically ill patients and like when the IR can be utilized. And then I talked about like it's going to train me to collaborate with my colleagues and approach like any clinical scenario with confidence and competence. So, yeah. I mean, surgery intern years are not hard, I would say, compared to TYs to get interviews from. So,
Yeah, they just want warm bodies. But to that end, I was also really picky about what I interviewed for in surgery. I wanted to go to programs that were not malignant, that didn't abuse their interns, that had like a night float system. I was like very picky on my intern year, perhaps more than I was on my actual integrated program. So I created a special like personal statement for surgery, and here I talk about like my experience on vascular surgery, and then why I want to do a surgery year. This will come up in all your interviews, but I think writing it down helped me like clarify why I wanted to do a surgery year. Um, and then I say that in like the second paragraph, and then my last paragraph was like more about my exposure at the intersection of like VIR and surgery with like liver grand rounds and stuff. And then from there, I talk about like as a surgery intern, I look forward to XYZ, like tumor board, transplant committees, etc. Um, and then outside the hospital, I talk a little bit about WCVIS. And then lastly, I talk about how I'm like eager to become an IR who really understands like the surgical foundations before I go into the rest of my training.
all right. So that actually was a little bit longer than I had anticipated, but I think there's like just a lot of examples, and I'm sure they're going to post this recording. But I am free. I will stay after the time ends, and I'm happy to either like we can do breakout rooms with like Abi and me, and then you can ask personal questions, or if you want to ask them to the general audience, like that's fine. Okay. Do we want to start with general questions?
So,
Hey guys, can I ask a question? Can you hear me okay? It's good to see you both, Lauren and Abby. Thank you for coming and giving us this information. I'm just wondering regarding those of you who dual applied with such a heavy interest in integrated programs and procedures, did you structure your DR personal statements in a similar way and then change the middle to be more focused on DR, or was the entire thing completely different?
So I think Abi and I approached it completely differently. So Abi did a completely new statement. I reused like half of my VIR statement because that was honestly like the extent of my exposure to radiology. I did not do any DR rotation until November of my application year. And so it's like I wasn't going to be able to speak about it in any particular detail other than like what lectures I had been in. So that's why I chose to focus mostly on VIR. And that's okay for the most part, from speaking to attendings, a lot of people's first exposure to DR is through IR. So I think it's totally okay to approach it from that way.
yeah, I would say I wrote a completely separate personal statement, largely because that's what um, I just couldn't figure out how to make my VIR statement seem more radiology focused rather than VIR. And I was like, I can't, like, it was just too much energy to try and make that fit rather than just write a new one. So I just ended up writing a completely different personal statement. In that, though, like the clinical example I used was VIR. And to Lauren's point, I also hadn't done like a radiology rotation. I still haven't. Um, I shadowed one of my attendings, who was a pediatric VIR and also like a radiologist. So she was like, you should come and watch me like and read like a few chest x-rays on babies to make sure that you don't hate it because you're gonna do this for a few years. And I was like, sure. So I like shadowed her for like a total of probably like 5 or 6 hours across all of med school. So I can't really say that I really know anything about radiology, but and the thought process of like where radiology fits into my education, I think was really where I was coming from in my personal statement.
Did either of you mention just that I want to do your ESIR program specifically, or did you just kind of leave that vague and say, I really like this. I think it's a good foundation for what I want to do.
I didn't say ESIR specifically. So obviously my example was VIR. My activities were a mix of VIR and DR. And so what I talked about was I was interested in several different specialties, right? I said I was interested in MSK, I was interested in breast, I was interested in like opening my own like imaging center. And then obviously I had the VIR experience. So they kind of know like that you are a VIR interested applicant, but you don't have to say like specifically, I only want to come to your program and do ESIR. Like you don't have to say that. I would say being more broad is going to help you.
Yeah, I never said that. I think for me, I was like, I like the fact that you can diagnose and do procedures, and that leaves it vague because you can do breast and like do biopsies, and you can do MSK and do stuff like ablations and stuff too. So I think being like I like procedures and I'm like I honestly don't have the exposure to all the subspecialties in radiology, which is true for the majority of medical students. I would just be honest, like I've had a lot of VIR exposure. I've like seen some components of radiology and I'm excited to really spend some more time during residency to critically think about what I enjoy and learn about the different components of what radiology has to offer before really choosing one path.
Thanks,
So they're
guys.
really great questions.